I guess that St. James and St. John were not nicknamed elsewhere in the Gospels as the sons of thunder for nothing, as referenced in Mark's Gospel 3:17. Apparently, these two brothers had a reputation for being somewhat overbearing hotheads. Why they were chosen by Jesus in the first place is a minor mystery, but perhaps no more than Jesus choosing a blundering Peter, an unsure Thomas, a turncoat tax collector named Matthew. Anyway, diplomacy not being their strong suit, and knowing they were part of Jesus' inner circle, they, along with St. Peter, were the ones who witnessed the transfiguration. St. John and St. James, in front of the other 10 disciples, asked Jesus to sit at his right and his left hand when he finally comes into power. Now that's chutzpah. That's the only term I could use here in church. Jesus listens to them and then very carefully explains that in his kingdom, it is not about sitting at his right or his left side. It is about standing. Jesus further went on to explain that each of them would stand by him, and they would stand for him, standing for all that Jesus is about. That poses the question, what is Jesus about? Jesus is about leadership, but specifically servant leadership, which is a concept that is a world apart from how the actual world works then and now today. We often experience leadership as authority, rank, comfort, entitlement, and in our world today, that is still a reality. However, many of those in leadership roles come to abuse their power. Individuals like Sheldon Silver, Christopher Collins, and Gloria Davis have all been convicted of wrongdoing, and were all our elected politicians. This corruption is also a reality in the religious establishments, like in the Diocese of Buffalo. Individuals like Anthony Frangione, who was convicted of embezzling, in addition to many of the clergy who were found guilty of abusing the power that was entrusted to them. Why do I share such a dismal picture? Many of us are aware of these individuals. We know that these leaders were highly educated with various degrees. Some were very wealthy, affluent, and lived well and were respected in the community. However, it is obvious that for all their privileged living and their good upbringing, they lacked ethics. Through their lives, they somehow became arrogant, trapped in their own egos, and abused the power that was entrusted to them. They were far from Jesus' teaching. Whoever wishes to be great among you will be your servant, the slave of all. Still, in society, leaders, both political and religious, are essential. Power is necessary. Power moves things and gets things accomplished. But we all have to remember the quote of Lord John Delberg Action: all power eventually corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. This is true unless it is grounded in the teachings of Jesus Christ. But leaders are not limited to those in power or elected officials. We are all leaders in our own right. We are parents, grandparents, teachers, coaches, students, and we touch people's lives in many different ways. And because of this, all of us are leaders. If we are to understand this gospel, each of us is called to be a leader. In Jesus' definition of leadership, one is called not to be served, but to serve and to give their lives as a ransom for many. This radical leadership, which we will refer to as servant leadership, is a deeply spiritual way to live by a balance each of us has to embrace to be a disciple of Jesus. The more responsibility and power I have, the more respect I must show and involve myself more deeply in service to others. It is like the quote from the Spider-Man movie, which I just watched with my grandsons, "With great power comes great responsibility." In order to practice servant leadership, we must keep in mind 4 concepts. The first concept is noticing the marginal that makes a servant leadership. We need to recognize in our daily lives all the people we come in contact with, treating them with respect, and if nothing else, meeting them with a smile and extending a greeting of hello. The second concept is servant leaders, they must think selfishly, but communally, making decisions for the benefits of the whole community instead of being concerned only with profit margins, career advancement for themselves, or getting ahead. The impact of decisions need to be weighed, keeping in mind the long-range effects on family, public health, and the community we live in at large. The third concept is servant leaders must be aware of their personal egos and strive to be humble. They must be willing to ask the hard question, am I part of the problem? And have systems in place to allow other people to voice their concerns and have input into decisions. Without feedback, a leader can easily become a tyrant. The last concept in servant leaders, they must be accountable to the people they are leading. Without accountability, a leader can be left with a self-serving viewpoint, their self-pride, and their ego. I believe that this gospel is telling all of us not to fall into the trap of our own ego and self-centeredness like St. John and St. James did at first. We need to be servant leaders and follow the example of our greatest servant leader, Jesus. He showed us this example specifically on Holy Thursday at the Last Supper. Jesus rose from supper, took off his outer garments, took a towel, and tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and dry them with a towel around his waist. Later, he told them, "Do you realize what I have done for you? You call me teacher and master, and rightly so, for indeed I am. If I therefore, the master and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. I have given you a model to follow, so that as I have done for you, you should also do." May God grant us the strength to be servant leaders, emulating the wonderful example he gave us in Jesus Christ. Amen.